bone and sickle, bleeding saints and forest witches, the past unburied, the books unsealed, the old celebration returning.
Hello, and welcome to my study. Please come in and have a seat. All the books surrounding you are those used as sources for our show, though the primary sources for tonight are more modern. My own books, The Krampus and the Old Dark Christmas and A Season of Madness, Fools, Monsters, and Marvels of the Old World Carnival. In keeping with this rather narcissistic turn, I will be presenting the episode without Mrs. Carswell at my side, though we do have her voice in a couple of pre-recorded passages. And, not to worry, she will be back for our Victorian ghost story episode closer to Christmas Eve. This will be a fairly short show, but one I hope which will expand your embrace and understanding of our holiday traditions. It's also the most alliterative title we've had to date. I present Episode 151, Christmas is Carnival, Carols and Calendars.
Hark how the bells, sweet silver bells, all seem to say, throw cares away. Christmas is here, bringing good cheer to young and old. Ding and the bolt, ding dong ding dong, that is their song. Ding joyful ring, all caroling.
Everyone knows Carol of the Bells. Fewer know that the melody is taken from an old Ukrainian folk song. The version we know, with the lyrics mentioning bells, was written in 1936 in New York City by a choral director in the public schools, Peter Joseph Wilowski. He was born in New Jersey, but his parents came from a northeastern part of Slovakia inhabited by Ukrainians. As part of that community, he would have heard the original folk song, which throughout the 1920s was being popularized by the state-funded touring choir, the Ukrainian Republican Kapella. In 1922, they'd performed the song at Carnegie Hall, and 11 years later, a children's choir, directed by Wilowski, performed the song on NBC Radio. He'd written English lyrics for the occasion. However, not as Carol of the Bells. It was called The Bluebirds. By 1936, he reworked the lyrics to the song we know. Why Bluebirds? Well, the original song, which you're hearing in its first recorded version from 1922, it does mention a bird. You know the lyrics.
A swallow has flown, it began to twitter, and call the master. Come out, O master, take a look at the sheep pen. There the ewes have given birth, and the lambs have been born. All your goods are great, and you will be rich. Though not money, it is chaff. You have a dark eyebrowed wife. A swallow has flown.
It may seem a bit less Christmassy than you thought, but it was a song of the season, a New Year's song, sung by visiting carolers or well-wishers on January 13th, New Year's, or originally sung in the March New Year. I'll get to the confusing January date later, but the celebration of the New Year in March was not unique to the old Ukrainians or other East Slavs. The Romans, too, began the year in that month and spread their springtime celebration of the year throughout the continent. In 45 BC, Julius Caesar moved the date to January in honor of Janus, god of beginnings and endings, instituting the Julian calendar. However, when the empire collapsed, the old springtime New Year came back, sometimes now associated with the Christian feast of the Annunciation on March 25th, or you could say the equinox. Other dates were also used, and only with the emergence of the Gregorian calendar in 1582 was January 1st restored as the date, but not everywhere. England didn't get with the program until 1752. The Slavs, who had not inherited the date through Roman conquest, but presumably had chosen the spring as a more natural time of beginnings, only shifted the start of the year to January in 1700 under Peter the Great. But they were still using the Julian rather than Gregorian calendar. Those two differ by 13 days, which explains the January 13th New Year in Ukraine, and that would be as understood in the Gregorian calendar. Of course, it was January 1st for Julians. This 13-day or 12-night Julian to Gregorian shift happened rather haphazardly throughout Europe, earlier in Catholic countries in the 16th century, and later in Protestant lands in the 17th and 18th century. Orthodox countries retained the Julian system the longest, into the 20th century. Naturally, some of this Julian-Gregorian confusion had its effect on Christmas and its celebration. But before we get into those specifics, I want to address something more general regarding the modern versus historical understanding of when that holiday is to be celebrated. While Christmas is properly only one day, the 25th, the Christmas season, historically, only began on that day. It ran through Epiphany, or Three Kings, on January 6th. The entire 12-day period was, and still is, known as Christmastide. But in a number of places, the season extended all the way to Candlemas on February 2nd. On a side note, the month-long season leading up to the 25th, Advent, was, and still is traditionally, a time of somber reflection, prayer, and anticipation, not a pre-Christmas whirlwind of festivities. All that came on the other side of the 25th. But in our timeline, it's just been flipped. All this came to my attention in an interesting way while I was writing my latest Carnival book. Carnival is also an extended season, not as we might imagine in America, just as that one Tuesday, Mardi Gras, the day before the Lenten sobriety of Ash Wednesday. While that day was universally fixed as an endpoint to Carnival, the start date varied wildly region by region. What's noteworthy regarding Christmas is the way the two seasons tended to merge on the calendar. The most common start date for Carnival is Epiphany, meaning the one season, at least historically, ran directly into the other. This is the case not only in Catholic France, Spain, and Italy, as well as all of Latin America, but to some extent in German-speaking lands too. The famous Venetian Carnival traditionally began already on December 26, and a few carnival festivities in that city still take place on that date. While German carnival celebrations don't begin in earnest until Epiphany, in many places, Carnival, or the fifth season as they call it, technically begins on November 11th, and that date is marked by the ceremonial appearance of a costumed carnival fool offering a comic proclamation about the season of madness arriving. So you can see how the festive seasons overlapped. And not only that, but one could say, to some extent, that Carnival was created out of Christmas. In my Krampus book, and in episodes in which I've discussed the medieval Feast of Fools and boy bishop customs, you've heard how wild and even dangerous celebrations could become. Church leaders eventually came to regard these festivities as an irreligious blight upon the holy season of the Nativity. Local bishops began cracking down on the activities, and by the 15th century, the Feast of Fools was no more. Or at least those profane energies were redirected outside the holy season into what the liturgical calendar calls ordinary time, the period between Candlemas and Lent. A perfect time for Carnival. But where did this anarchic Feast of Fools come from? What wild impulses permeated to the very heart of European culture, the church. That is, what outside influences might have turned the sacred liturgy topsy-turvy, if even for a season. The answer here would go far toward explaining not only the wilder aspects of Christmas celebrations, but the origin of Carnival itself. That origin is absolutely not the Saturnalia, as you may have heard in the case of Christmas, or the Lupercalia with Carnival. The most influential Roman festival, in fact, was the calends of January, the Roman New Year. While the word calends, calendae, designated the first day of any month, the January calends was celebrated more widely and persistently than any other Roman holiday. Unlike our other contenders, attestations of calend celebrations come from all over the empire and are far more numerous. Accounts of these celebrations not only continued into the 5th century when Saturnalia and Lupercalia festivities ceased to be reported in the West, but in fact increased in number during the Christian era and continued to appear for another 6 centuries. Only after the 10th century, when Carnival first appeared, was the calends no longer mentioned, suggesting a partial supplanting of the one by the other. While this is certainly a topic of my Carnival study, already in my Krampus book I've discussed the calends. Animalistic costumes like the goat-like Krampus are also numerous in Carnival traditions and were highlighted in a description of the calends left by several writers, including Caesarius, Bishop of Arles, France, writing in the 5th century. He complains about those who
change their appearance for that of wild animals. Some are dressed up in the skins of farm animals. Others put on the heads of wild animals, celebrating and leaping about.
Cross-dressing, drunkenness, and absurd satiric songs are also mentioned. Sounds very much like Carnival to me, or the untamed Christmases we've long forgotten. Now, to return to my annoying calendar fetish for a moment, consider how the calends of January 1st is perfectly centered between Christmas Day and Epiphany, and its customs might as easily be nudged toward Christmas as Carnival. Transfer I labeled calendrical drift in my Krampus book. We've seen an example of this with our horned friend, whose festivities are out on the far edge of things in early December in Advent. The Krampus customs of December 6 seem to have borrowed from the far older Perst customs, centering on January 6, a month later. Already in 1750, we find an illustration of the Butzenbercht, Frau Perste, depicted as an old hag carrying off naughty children in a basket. This woodcut was created more than a century before the name Krampus ever appeared, suggesting that customs associated with the Persten drifted out into the far reaches of Advent. Americans have a very obvious example of this sort of calendrical drift in the person of Santa Claus, old Saint Nick, now fixed to December 25th, rather than his original home, the 6th of December. Movement in the other direction, backward on the calendar, is provided in the figure of the Slovenian Kurent, one of those animalistic carnival figures to whom I devote a whole chapter in my latest book. He's dressed in a tunic of shaggy sheepskins from a particularly long-haired breed, and atop his head he wears a headpiece featuring 2 horn-like sticks spanned by a string of bright ribbons and turkey feathers. In certain regions, an actual set of horns, bull horns, are used instead, and I suspect this was the original form, with the sticks and ribbons being a sort of vestigial imitation. The Quarenti wear leather masks, usually painted black, with ridiculously long, dangling tongues of red cloth. And around their waists is a chain hung with 5 cowbells and silk handkerchiefs collected as a sort of tribute from female spectators. Leaving those aside, the other elements, shaggy fur suit, horns, bells, and dangling tongue, may remind you of a lovable devil we've discussed. And for good reason, I believe. Across the Slovenian border to the north is the homeland of the Krampus. While regarded as a Slavic country now, Slovenia was once part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the region where the tradition of the Kurent is particularly strong remained mostly German-speaking into the early 20th century. It's also been suggested that the name Kurent was derived from the German word for Christmas carolers, that is, Kurrende, which itself comes from the Latin currere, meaning to run, which is puzzling. Christmas carolers, as we know them today, don't really run. But couldn't this also point to an origin in something a bit wilder and more mischievous? A bit more calendly, maybe? Anyway, the point I'm trying to make about the Slovenian Kurent is not that the tradition derives from the Krampus, but that they both share a common ancestor in carnival figures, those associated with Epiphany. Like the Persten, the Kurenti conduct luck-bringing house visits, but they do bring with them something more strongly associated with springtime fertility and carnival. That is, they drag a decorated plow. And like the Trestura, a type of Perst found in the Pinzgau region of Austria, the Kurenti do a kind of hopping dance explained by the folk saying, "So high the Perst leaps, so high grows the flax." The same being said for the Kurent and Slovenian millet. The custom of dragging a decorated symbolic plow, as with the Kurenti, is particularly common in carnival activities, and it's found in Austria, Germany, Italy, and even in the UK, which doesn't really celebrate an actual carnival, but does have Plough Monday. It's also found in Bulgaria, a country where the transfer and merger of Christmas and carnival customs is particularly illustrative. The figure embodying carnival there is the kukar, something of a catch-all term, as there are as many regional names as there are maddeningly diverse presentations. Some kukari are incredibly tall, elongated by conical caps or lofty headdresses. Others wear incredibly intricate masks and headdresses, vests and shawls densely beaded and embroidered and stitched and glued with fringes and tufts and tassels and sequins, buttons, mirrors, and streaming ribbons. Others are more rustic constructions formed from animal hides and horns, skulls and pelts, tails and feathers. Some display a multiplicity of heads piled atop and dwarfing the wearer's body. Totem pole-style constructions of cartoonishly primitive eyes, beaks, teeth, tongues, and various waggling appendages. And others, perhaps the most eye-catching of all, are just towering spindles of dense, flowing fur moving about on two legs. The only element almost all kukari share is that they wear bells. Now, as to that Carnival Christmas nexus, in Western Bulgaria, activities are more associated with the New Year, the middle of the Christmas cycle, while in the East they take place during the week before Lent. That is very much the domain of Carnival, of course. And only in the East do you find plow rituals embodying springtime concerns with fertility. Why the Christmas or New Year's customs of Western Bulgaria should be subsumed into what's regarded as Carnival has to do with the nation's late adoption of the Gregorian calendar. Yes, it's that again. In Bulgaria, the shift only happened in 1916, and that change only applied to the secular world, as the feasts and fasts of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church were not conformed to the Gregorian calendar until 1968. And this brings us back to that peculiar New Year's date associated with our Ukrainian carol about a luck-bringing swallow. If you recall, it was sung door-to-door on January 13th, which is the same date on which the Bulgarians now hold a nationalized kukar event, the Surva Games in the town of Pernik. Surva is the Bulgarian New Year, and that 13-day lag represents the lag between, again, the Julian and Gregorian dates. Those 13 days in Bulgaria are known as the unclean days or pagan days, and the belief that evil forces are loose during that interval is common throughout the Balkans. Across the border in North Macedonia, this period is also referred to as the pagan or unchristened days. Around Epiphany, when these powers are at their apex, soot-blackened figures known as Arapides, analogous to Arapi in Bulgaria, can be seen processing through towns and villages, jangling bells to frighten off evil spirits. The same customs, with all but identical costumed characters, extend into Greek Macedonia, in Thessaly, under the name of Rougatia. More widely known in Greece is the mythology of the Kalakanzari, widely translated as Christmas goblins, who arise from the underworld to wreak havoc during this period. Bulgarian folklore has an analogous figure, sometimes said to be the target of kukar magic, the Karakonju. Similar beings associated with this period are also found in Serbia and Albania, and throughout the Balkans, not just these, but witches, werewolves, vampires, and other malevolent creatures are empowered at this time. In Slovenia, home of the Kurand, these are called the wolf days, and wolves during this time are supposed to be supernaturally predisposed to attack. All of this likely sounds familiar to listeners and readers of my Krampus book, which devotes an entire chapter to the terrors of the German Twelfth Nights, or Rauhnächte, along with the customs used to protect against these forces. And now, let's return to that Ukrainian carol one last time. It belongs to a genre of song called kolyaka, or Christmas carols, songs sung door to door by carolers who bring good luck with their visits. The Ukrainian name of the period between Christmas and Epiphany is related, Kolyada. In all Slavic lands, or lands that have been under Slavic influence, cognates of this word are used in this same way. In Russia, Belarus, Poland, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Serbia, Lithuania, Czechia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, and northern Greece. And as it turns out, some scholars posit a common Proto-Slavic origin to all these words, one related to the Latin calendae, or calends. One of the things that attracted me to the Krampus tradition initially was the immediacy of the house visit, the idea of mythological characters entering your very own home to put on a show. In the modern West, children are allowed to imagine a magical being entering the home unseen on Christmas Eve, but rarely do costume visitors come knocking at the door. There may be some carolers come calling, though dwindling few, and their presence is just a souvenir of a souvenir. Old practices, a resurrected fantasy by Dickens, now only remembering the days of Victoria. Nothing medieval, much less the Roman calends and its mischief makers and wild runners. Certain charmed spots in Europe have resisted the passage of time, difficult to reach alpine valleys and regions in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, areas often touched by the Slavic resistance to change. What you've been hearing in the background are Slavic kolyatka, caroling groups who might also enter homes to put on short performances echoing old medieval mystery plays, nativity plays, in which King Herod, after ordering the massacre of the innocents, is slain by death and claimed by the devil. or rhymed presentations in which the three kings rhythmically draw and thrust swords in their sheaths. Which is what you're hearing. Odd. In these regions, during these outings, there are good luck bearers and chimney sweeps, snapping storks and goat-like creatures, soldiers and policemen, old babushkas representing the ancestors, and always the Magi's star held aloft on a stick, sometimes spinning like a pinwheel. And I'll leave you with what it sounds like.
Церква збудувала, і з трьома верхами радуйся. Радуйся, небо, земле веселися, Христос народився. А в перше віконце світить ясне сонце.